This workshop will expose graduate students to issues related to appreciating, valuing, and leveraging diversity and inclusion inside and outside the classroom. Faculty across the different colleges will share perspectives, experiences, and strategies with respect to addressing diversity student needs, capitalizing on differences in the classroom, and maximizing the value of diversity and inclusion. We hope that you'll enjoy this workshop and that you'll remember to evaluate it afterward. I'll now welcome Wee Youssef and ask her to introduce the panel.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Wee Youssef. I'm an associate professor in the School of Public Service in the Strome College of Business, and I am also the chair for the Preparing Future Faculty program here at ODU. So I welcome you, and just to give you a very quick, brief history about why all of a sudden we're having a Preparing Future Faculty workshop in the CLT Summer Institute. We identified that there was a real need for graduate student professional development in the summer. We did not do any Preparing Future Faculty programming at all in the summer. And so I talked to Joyce Armstrong, and she's like, we can do this as part of the CLT Summer Institute, get more graduate students here, and meet the needs of the graduate students. So welcome to the first Preparing Future Faculty workshop here in the CLT Summer Institute. We originally had 4 panelists. Unfortunately, one of our experts, Jennifer Kidd, had a conflicting event with Pete in one of the other rooms, so she's unable to be here. But you've probably heard from her a little bit already, so you've gotten some of the words of wisdom. But I wanted to kind of briefly introduce, we have 3 great experts here. Sit up straight. We have Dr. Kimberly Adams-Tufts from the College of Health Sciences, Dr. Ed Gomez from the College of Education, and Jeff Toussaint from the College of Arts and Letters. And I'm from the College of Business. So at least you're getting more than half of the representation of colleges here at ODU. I'm not the most organized, so. So I actually had some discussion questions that I circulated to our panelists in advance. And what I wanted to do was basically kind of give them each about 10 minutes to talk briefly about kind of some of these issues and how they deal with diversity and inclusion in the classroom and outside of the classroom. And then I actually have an activity for us to work on, and then we will adjourn. So I'm going to start with Dr. Kimberly Adams-Tufts, the senior faculty member.
Okay, people. Oh. Que vida loca. Well, I think this is really important, first of all. This is a really important session because often in the academy, we don't do as well as we could with succession planning and with developing our own capital. And the capital that we have in the university is human capital, and particularly the folks that are coming up behind us. We don't want to be like those folks, like the crabs in the bucket or the lobsters that try to pull the people back in and not give them any support. We want to be the people that push you out with your new Mercedes-Benz tricycle, and you're ready to do all you possibly thought you could do. So I think that this is a grand opportunity for us, and so I thank you for it, and I thank the students and the faculty who are here in the room, because I'm sure we'll learn from each other. So the first question was, how has diversity played a role in your experience as faculty? Well, it has in several ways. Sometimes I developed this very early in my career, early 30s, new faculty person. I always talk about threefold. When you don't know what to write in the grant, start out talking about threefold and figure out what the threefolds are and how to articulate it to someone. So for me, it's been really, truly threefold in that clinically, around that same time period, I was recruited to a university to open a nurse-managed healthcare center. And the nurse-managed healthcare center, the purpose was that we wanted to serve people who are underserved, people who are in underserved urban areas, the impoverished, and the elderly. And our business was, I taught our staff to say and us to say, we were a bunch of very idealistic young people. And we worked for ourselves, and we hired physicians to work for us. And what we did is we said we did everything from womb to tomb, because we had freestanding birthing, and that just was unheard of in Ohio. And why diversity? Because when I would go out to talk to different constituency groups, I had to be a person who could articulate what it might be like for someone who was an underserved person in an underserved urban area, or who was impoverished, or who was elderly. You know, they used to be the full professor in science at Old Dominion University, and now they retired 7 years ago, and when they go into a physician or a nurse practitioner or whoever is the provider, they act like they're 4 years old again. I had to begin to think about those different diverse perspectives and be able to articulate to others and put others in those people's shoes. And that's really how I got started in policy work, because I had to do policy work in order to get some laws changes to make that particular center happen and to be able to serve those people. From the perspective of being a teacher, I would say it's been assisting students to learn about diversity in a lot of ways, but role modeling it for them several ways, from being able to learn things from people who don't look like them, and to accept that those people do have expertise and credibility. It's one thing that's been sort of, I had to take it on as a mission. Well, you know, I used to be asked all the time, was I a student when I was faculty? That's one of the things, so I'm too young, you shouldn't be faculty. And now everybody knows I'm not, you know, too young to be faculty. But being able to advocate for that, but also they weren't used to a woman being an expert. They were used to someone who they thought was African American, but they didn't know her full background, but they knew she didn't look like them being an expert. So those kind of things. So role modeling that, but also from that, not just for personal reasons, but getting them to consider a different perspective. It's been the biggest piece. And globally, things that have always gotten me my whole life. I grew up technically in New Jersey, came to Virginia like it was around the corner, but my father would say, let's go home on Friday, and he meant to Virginia, Western Virginia, and we were from New York, New Jersey. And all kinds of people. My first favorite food was Italian. I went to Central American High School, I would call it, a Catholic high school, private Catholic high school, where people from all over the world. Our senior prom, we went to the richest Jews in the Jewish families' home in our area. There were two really rich Jewish families in our private Catholic school, because they didn't want to send their kids three towns over to go to the Jewish school. And when we went there, the thing about that is, we had our after party at their Katz's home, but their maid was, one of our classmates was from Trinidad, and his mom was the maid, and none of us cared. That's how we had been raised to value all kinds of people, and we'd always been around all kinds of people. So when I got into the real world and school in the Midwest and such, and people would, in the university, they talk about third world countries. And today they talk about developing countries. How can you be developing if you've been in existence for how many thousands of years? And a friend and former professor, good friend of mine, I worked in Zimbabwe, and I was telling her about Great Zimbabwe. And she said to me, Kimberly, is that in Rhodesia or Southern Rhodesia? I don't get them straight since they changed the names. And I said, Wilma, that's really interesting. This is doctorally prepared, well-known in her field, the textbook writer. Well, that's not their names. Wilma, the official name was Zimbabwe. So Great Zimbabwe is older than the ruins in Italy. So that kind of perspective, students have to know that because we've rewritten history, it does not make it doesn't have all veracity. So that's why I had to do that. So how are you incorporating diversity and inclusion into your courses? Well, first, just the facts, ma'am. Just the facts. So impacting knowledge. So I teach the only health inequalities course in our country called Disparities Around the World. It's called Health Inequalities. So I call it Health Inequities. I go in between in our college. And so I have to teach the facts, ma'am, that a lot of things that we think people are at risk for is not because they're biologically deficit. So knowledge first, then attitudes. So we do a lot of attitudinal work and thinking. So for example, in the 6th week, I have a debate about language accessibility. And it's a debate. Students aren't comfortable yet. So I assign their positions. And I even say, I don't care what you really think or believe, you are not allowed to say, well, I'm saying this, but I really think this, or I really believe this. You have to assume the position that you've been assigned. And it's kind of out there. It's about, should all health providers learn another language to be able to serve the population? Or be mandated, like I'm talking policy, like they're mandated by law. And you have to be pro or con, and you have to bring all this information from the national standards for culturally linguistic appropriate services. So that's week 6. They've learned a lot of facts. And they've learned some things and thought some things and learned terms that they've never even heard of, and maybe privilege and all these things. So they have this really good source at UNC. Every year UNC has a bunch of really good conferences that are actually webinars. One's coming up in the first week of June. So I'll bring the keynote. Like folks who are from Harvard, I'll bring the keynote in as a video. In the first week, the first 2 weeks, we watch, we listen, we learn, we read. Might even be 2 good weeks of solid reading after the first week, where I teach them ways of acting in this kind of course. So once that's happened, knowledge and attitudes begin to shift a little bit. Then the week night, here's something. Would you say that race is biological or a social construct? And now you don't get assigned. You get to choose your position, and you bring the evidence to the table to support your perspective. So it's progressive. And advising students. Most of my students are students that other folks would not prefer to have as students, and I mean my doctoral students. So this week or tomorrow, Friday, I'm meeting with someone who's from Oman. She's my newest student. And the difficulty with that is we do the research in Oman. Oh, we learned that her 4th committee member cannot be with us on Monday because Skype is banned in Oman. I didn't know that until this morning. And it's a challenge because the thought patterns are different. Maybe the language is not the same. When we do the work, we have to have it in English. Then we back translate it. This is my 2nd time into Arabic. Then we make sure we get it authenticated, that it's back translated correctly into English. And we do all that. And the last one's IRB application was 96 pages. So in my advising, I wanted to, and I just had someone who just finished. And she was American, but she would be someone that a lot of folks in the academy and other places would look down on. She graduated. She was our only PhD student in health sciences last 2 Saturdays ago. And she is a quantitative queen, and I'm not a quantitative researcher. Primarily, I'm qualitative. I had to learn a whole lot. But in my advising, I look for the diverse, well, they look for me now. They look for me. And so in advising, not only do I have to say to a student like who just graduated, well, I have to learn your quantitative thought, and you have to learn how to write. You cannot write. But I also had to talk to her near the end after she trusted me about how she presents herself as a person. And if she's going into the academy, you don't want people to look at you and say, oh, you're from a certain part of the country and you're a certain stereotypic type of person that we don't care so much about in America, before they find out you're the queen of quantitative analysis and hierarchical modeling. So that, in advising, it comes across. Why did I decide to incorporate issues related to diversity and inclusion? Because I learned from the moment I was born that we live in a globally connected world, and that all the folks at this table, we look different from each other, but we are all the same 99.9% of the time. Though our cultures may be different, our values may be different, we may have been taught to think differently, but if we don't acknowledge our similarities as well as value our differences, we cannot move forth as a collective body in the academy.
Can I go? Yes, you can go. All right. So I had similar questions. How did has anyone taught a diversity class here? Okay, one person. I'm always curious to sort of find out what my audience is like before I give or answer certain things. In terms of how diversity played a role in my experience as a faculty member, I'm going to go to the notion of administrative leadership matters. Administrative leadership earlier on in my career as a faculty member did not value diversity, was part of the old white boy network, and was pretty much, if you're not a Southern white male, you pretty much were not going to be part of the club. And that's how it was. And I'm just going to put it out there because that's how it was. And it's not that way now. And if you want to do the research, you can look up the previous admin. But, you know, the current administrative focus is so much more different. Under this current administration, I was actually able to establish the Hispanic Latino Employee Association, even though there's, you know, we represent probably 1% of the entire faculty. That's another story. But, you know, I think administrative leadership is everything, and since it's changed, we've had a renewed interest in what the Equal Employment Opportunity Office does for us, especially as faculty members and staff, and the advances that have come, especially over the last 4 years in particular. And I'm not getting paid, and I'm a full professor, so I can really say whatever the hell I want. Right, we? Okay, so, and this is being recorded, right. So going back to privilege, no. How are you incorporating diversity and inclusion into your courses, research, or advising? From a research perspective, my research area is in ethnicity, race, and recreation. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of funding out there for that. So I had to switch my focus to more of an urban recreation, urban parks focus, but within that, I still look at differences between different user groups. So I still incorporate the issue of diversity even within my urban focus. I teach a diversity course, and within the diversity course, some things that I was able to incorporate into that class is they have a diverse ability training and workshop that they provide, and I incorporated it into my my class this year. Just invited them to come in. It's a 3-hour class. Hey, it's a 3-hour training. It's a win-win. They get 60 students. I get a day off from teaching. And then I also brought in the safe space training class for the LGBTQ community. And those are two things that they can, it's sort of value added, because then they can actually put that on their resume as well, that they've had that training. And oftentimes a lot of the interview process for my students is, to what extent have you been exposed to diversity or diverse issues? And they actually have documentation that they can show and provide. So it's sort of a value added from a course perspective. I've also invited the EEO office to come in and speak. And then we have a standing policy for all our majors within Parks, Recreation, and Tourism Studies that in the spring we run the Special Olympics on campus for the Little Feet meet, and it's the one day that all the classes across our major, they do not have classes that morning, and everyone that's a major, that's a student in our major has to be there. And if they're not, they will receive some penalization for it. From an advising, about a third of my students are African American or Latino. 70% are women. Most of especially the tourism side and the therapeutic recreation side are primarily women who are in those areas. And then we've had a lot, not a lot, but I guess probably about maybe 5 to 6% of our students on an annual basis have some sort of documented physical disability or mental disability, but also learning disabilities. If you include that, it's probably closer to about 20% of our student body. So, you know, we have a lot of variety of things that we sort of contend with when we're dealing with advising. So I built in aspects that basically address those issues. The reason why we decided to create this diversity class within the major is we're going through our accreditation and one of the aspects is the issue of diversity, of preparing people for the future. And I'm like, why don't we have a diversity course? And why am I not teaching it? It's like right in my wheelhouse. So we revamped our curriculum, and part of it was to include this. And then we wanted to make sure that, when people think diversity, the first thing that comes to mind is race and ethnicity issues. But we wanted to make it much more expansive. So we looked at issues related to social class, we looked at issues related to gender, sexual identity, and we looked at issues related to ageism as well as disabilities. And those are the primary 6. And so we made those into 2 per module in the class. And so the other reason is that we're a service-oriented degree, and the reality is that the people that we have traditionally interacted with are changing, and those that are coming to tourism venues as well as national park systems, well, maybe not the national parks, they're still primarily white, but definitely our state and local parks, that's changing. So therefore, we have to prepare them for a changing population. In terms of my instructional strategies, I love what I do in this class. It's more fun for me, I think, than the students. We do a lot of role playing. We discuss stereotypes, and I actually pass out a card, and I'm like, this is your stereotype. And you have to literally act like that stereotype, and people have to try and guess it. So it's a really cool activity because it really sensitizes people to what their own predispositions are. We do look into the issue of white privilege in particular, and we do a lot of gender role reversals, where I would put on a scenario or a situation, and they would have to give me their interpretation of what happened in the scenario, and it often cases is not what they're looking at, because I changed the nature of the culture, the nature of the role of the genders, and the nature of some of our predisposed norms. So it's really good. Reflection papers are an awesome way for me to really get at how they view some of the concepts that we've talked about, but they have to be intentional reflection papers. So I tie them to concepts in the classroom. I tie them to notions that we've discussed amongst even our peers. So it may or may not be sort of things that we looked at. The other thing is I do interview assignments. So they have a list of 10 or 12 different sort of characteristics, and they have to interview someone who has at least 3 characteristics that are different from themselves. And then I give them a list of, I think, 20 questions that they would have to then interview this person related to. And even if it's someone that they know, but they're different than each other. And those papers are really good because oftentimes they're like, I really didn't know this about this individual. And it's eye-opening for them, and it's great reading for me, and some of the best writing I've seen. And that's a whole nother lecture. And then, again, case studies with intentional questions. In terms of what I've learned, I did want to mention one thing. Project Implicit, if you have not been to it, is just Google Project Implicit. I have them take surveys, and they have different things from race to gender to views of your president to sexuality, Arab-Muslim relations, religion, skin tone, gender, weight, age, nativisms, weapons. And they have to take a test, and it basically sees what your predisposition is to that particular group or idea, right? And Project Implicit is based out of Harvard, and it's really an interesting. Well, I'm from Boston, and it's really it's easy for me to do that one. And I did one on gay. So you have completed the gay straight IAT, and I always have to look it up. IAT is Implicit Association Test, and in my gay straight one, I said, it says here, your data suggests a moderate automatic preference for gay people compared to straight people. It's so much more fun. Anyways, so I got that. I didn't do so well with the weight one though. So it just sort of see, you can sort of see what your predispositions are, and that's another one that I like to give to students as even extra credit. so give them the option. You don't have to do it. Yeah, it takes a little while to do it, so it's a good extra credit. And then, so students are more accepting of differences, generally speaking, is one of the things that I've learned. And I've also learned that faculty tend to want to avoid the talk about diversity sometimes, or not speak on the topic unless it's their own area of expertise. So they feel, well, I don't really do research on it, so I don't know if I really want to talk about it. I'm like, talk about it. I mean, what the hell? It's right there. Then diversity is more than just race and ethnic relations. As I mentioned, it's socioeconomic status, it's age, generational status, disability, gender, and sexual identity. We have to get rid of the notion, and again, and I start my class with race and ethnicity because it's sort of what you know in terms of diversity, and so it's always good to sort of start on something familiar, but then sort of go into other areas that sort of evolve from that familiar point.
Hi, I'm Jeff. How's diversity? So diversity is important for me because I'm a sociologist, and one of the things I often tell my students in my classroom is that not we specifically, any of you, but we as a society have been taught that historically when we said different, we meant deficient, superior, inferior. And what I like to do is I like to say, well, we are all different. Look around the room, right, and especially in my classes. And I like to remind students that just because we're different doesn't mean we're more so or less than anybody. And if we can start to change our paradigms about how we see each other and how we start to view each other, then we can start to engage in a dialogue about how we can promote social change. So diversity is important for me because we are all diverse. We're all from different socioeconomic backgrounds, sexuality, the list goes on. You've probably heard it a lot today and yesterday. But for me, it becomes important because one of my favorite documentaries I show in a class is called Africa in Transition. It's looking at contemporary social movements in Africa. It's an impossible course to teach. But what I do is I base it on institutions. What are economic social movements? What are political social movements, right? And so this has a point. So one of my favorite documentaries is a documentary about the atrocities that are going on in the Congo, and it's called Congo and the Crisis. It's an amazing documentary. I would recommend everyone go check it out. But one of the things that I found so interesting, and I was always trying to articulate all these years, is at the end of this documentary, this guy who's the head for the Congo Crisis advocacy group, he says, if you care about the Congo, then you should care about women's rights. If you care about the Congo, then you should care about children's rights. If you care about the environment, you should care about what's going on in the Congo. And he goes on, and I'm just like, oh my God, that's amazing. Because that's what I've always been trying to say, right? If you care about diversity and you care about inclusion, then you should care about what people's lived lives are, whether you be a male, female, straight, gay, whatever the case may be. And a lot of times students see things as their own issues, right? Audre Lorde, there is no hierarchy of oppressions. And what she essentially says in this is that oppression for anyone is oppression for all of us, right? It's not race, it's not gender oppression. Which one is worse, right? When we engage in these types of dialogues, and not any of us, but our students will say, well, I'm African American, my oppression is worse than being gay or lesbian, or vice versa, right? And so you start to try to get students to understand that diversity and the idea of individuals and the identities we encompass are so vast and so long that it's impossible to label them. I often make a joke. I don't know if you can pull this one off, but I get some laughs with it. As I say, so what are we? We got race, class, gender, sexuality, and you're listening to this, and I go, what kind of cheese do you consume? They're like, cheese. I'm like, yeah, but isn't cheese and the type you consume a component of your social class, right? Do you eat the cellophane type cheese that you unwrap? Or do you eat dill Havarti? And they're like, you're annoying, right? But the idea is we're trying to get them to understand that sometimes even some of our cultural practices, the things that we do, are also signs of diversity. And it's something as simple as cheese, so I often get laughs with that. So in my courses, whenever we're talking about women's rights, we're incorporating race. Whenever we're talking about race, we're talking about ethnicity. We're talking about all of these things simultaneously because they're never separate. We might talk about them in separate parts of our classes. So in other words, when I'm teaching the class and we're talking about economic social movements in Africa, it's very much tied to political social movements, right? There's not one or the other. They're all intertwined and they're all playing a role. And so for me, I'm not as courageous as Ed. I usually talk about institutions first because I'm a sociologist, more the macro guy. It's safe, right? But then towards the end, I start to get more to the micro. Now let's talk about, obviously, race is an organizing feature of our society, macro level. But race is also very personal for people, right? So you get to that micro. So by the end of the semester, we get into things that become more personal for people because we've talked about how race and gender and sexuality are organizing features of our social structure. And one of the things that I do, instructional strategies, is often in my classes, I find myself quite funny if you can't tell, is that I will give them inequality quizzes. And I do this the first day of class. And I say, anybody who passes this quiz, you are exempt from the class, you get an A, I'll see you later. And then, because sociology is my field, and you can do this for your own field, whatever the case may be. Science is your sword, right? Reason is your shield, right? I love the critical theorists. But anyways, but the idea is I come in there and I give them 5 questions based on inequality in America. What is the relationship between black and white wealth? For every $1 that whites happen to own, how much do you think African American or Latino families own? And not to bore you, but we go through this big, long thing. And what I'm trying to do, and this is what you can do in your classes, is sometimes they want to hold on to their truth. I call it their tree of knowledge. You can show them statistics from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, U.S. Census data, and they're like, yeah, but my one friend Phil, he's lazy and he doesn't want to work hard and he wants to live on welfare. And you're like, oh, God, your sample of one is quite problematic. So what I do is I use research. And I say, well, what's the percentage of people in America that are currently using food stamps? 40%. 40%? All right, cool. 60%. So you're saying 6 out of 10 people in this room are living on food stamps? Yeah. Okay, right? And what I do is I get them to think about what are their assumptions about diversity, inclusion, differences among racial and ethnic groups, gender, and then I give them the real answer. And what's fascinating to me, this is fascinating, maybe I'm a really bad teacher, is that students who take my intro class, they'll take me later on, and they're still getting it wrong. And I'm like, oh, I'm a failure. I'm the worst teacher ever. They're like, oh, yeah, I remember the answer now. But one of the things I think that you can do to promote a sense of empathy and compassion for others is use your science, right? Use your data. If you're an engineer, what do you think is the percentage of women in America who are engineers, or whatever the case may be? I'm just thinking about this off the top of my head, right? So you can sit there and start to challenge some of these assumptions because we live in a world where the majority of our students think that everything is equal. History never happened. I always tell them that we're like sponges. We just added water and here we are, 2016, right? Race relations, ethnic relations, colonialism, nah, man, no big deal. It's just my cousin Phil, right? That's all they know, right? And so one of the things that you can do in your classrooms to really promote this idea of diversity is challenge them with the science that you know, the science that you hold near and dear to your heart, and say, why did you have these assumptions? And I always tell students, I'm not here to judge you, I just want you to start to think. And that first day of class that opens up their mind to the possibility that maybe their cousin Phil, or I call it my dad's sociology, my dad says, right, that you may have been wrong, right, unless your dad works for the Bureau of Labor Statistics. I'm still waiting for that one day somebody's going to be like, yeah, my dad does. And he said it's this percentage, and I was right. And I'll be like, all right, you get an A. See you later. So that's just something to think about. Just use your science. Use your research. For me, everything I do at the university, one of my colleagues, Lou Lombardo, who's retired now, when I first came here, he said, you got 2 choices, Jeff. He said, you can either be at the university and let things happen to you, or you can be a part of things that are happening. I was like, damn. That sucks. That's a lot of pressure. I just wanted to go home and play my guitar. So what I did is I started joining committees. I started being on the forefront of things that I wanted to see at the university. So my good friend Stephanie Sanders over here, been working with her on the President's Task Force. These are things that you can do. If you think that these issues matter to you and you're doing research that you think matters that can help the university, then be a part of it, right? Next year, they're implementing a six discussions, a dialogue series about different components of diversity on campus. This is something that was kind of an idea between myself and my friend Andrew over in counseling services, but I brought it to the committee, and they said, that's a great idea, let's do it. And so what I would encourage all of you is that don't just think about implementing diversity just within the classroom, right, or the things that you can do in there, because you're the expert, right? But try to think about things you can also do at the university level to promote this more sense of cohesion and compassion. People are saying, well, you're a sociologist. What's that? I'm like, study of groups. No, what I always tell people is what I'm really teaching in my classes and in my courses is compassion and empathy for others. And I do it through science. Because science is what can save us, right? It's the thing. We're clinging to it. And I also say this in the same breath. I don't know the truth. I'm seeking the truth. I'm on a path to try to find out what are the best answers. How can we make the campus more inclusive? I don't have the answers. If I did, we'd all be hugging each other, right? But we don't have that. And so it's a path, and it's a journey, and it's a process. And so just because you're not successful at one moment in one classroom with one class, right? We've all had that one class, right? Then you just keep fighting the good fight, and you keep doing it until you figure out something that works for you, right? I try to use a lot of dumb jokes and humor, but if I can get them laughing, that means they're listening. And if they're listening, then I can teach them, right? And I can help you work on material. No, I'm just kidding, right? So what lessons have I learned? I've learned that change is possible. My seat switching example, I've seen where things I never thought were possible, two students who I thought would never talk to each other just because they always sat on the other side of the room, for example, they do talk to each other, right? And change is possible. I think as somebody who studies sociology and social inequality, sociology is the study of sad stuff, right? But I've seen students come in and they've changed their perspectives on others. I can see it in my colleagues when they teach something and students see that light bulb go on and you become inspired, right? So diversity is in all of our classrooms. We're all from diverse backgrounds, ourselves, our students, and the people we're interacting with on campus. And so use your resources. Call in your colleagues. How do you do this? How do you incorporate this? I would advise you to contact Stephanie Sanders. We give seminars. Well, we gave seminars about power and privilege in the classroom. If you're having trouble dealing with those difficult conversations, there's people out there that you can reach out to and they'll help you. I have no problem buying me some coffee. No, I'm just kidding, right? We'll just sit down and we'll just talk, right? Because I think that in this moment in time, we, as our generation and generations to come after us, are bearing the brunt of hundreds of years of silence. And how are we supposed to promote a more diverse and inclusive society when we're afraid to talk about it? How are we supposed to promote more diversity and inclusion amongst our students to value those differences when they're afraid to talk about it? So we're, as Paulo Freire says, we're caught up in a culture of silence. And we just keep waiting. It'll get better. It'll get better. And then you keep telling yourself that, and then 10 years later, you're like, damn, there was another riot at another school. People are angry about race or ethnic or gender relations. And so I encourage you to open up spaces within your classroom and on the community to talk about the difficult things, because it's only through dialogue and doing the hard work, the uncomfortable work, that we will actually move forward as ODU and as community and as society. Thank you.
All right, so I want to open the floor for questions for our awesome experts. And Anna has the orange mic if somebody insists on using the orange mic. I know this is the last session, but come on, people.
Harvard. I didn't. But I parked my car in Harvard Yard.
May I ask something related to Boston? Is it Project Implicit? The survey, Project Implicit. Yeah. Okay. I just want to break the ice. I'm over there.
Any other questions? Okay, so if we don't have any questions, oh, sorry, Ed, you want to add?
I just want to make a comment on something that he said. Political movements, both current and former political movements, are great to include in the class. And then you have so much fodder within the last 2 years. And I just wrote down, like, from Black Lives Matters to Supreme Court decisions to Hillary as a candidate to Trump. I mean, Trump has been great for me in the classroom, as much as I hate the guy. You know, yeah, I wish I had alcohol and wasn't on drugs right now. I mean, prescribed drugs, just so we're clear. You know, so, yeah, it's really good because the thing that I've been that struck me the most is if it's not on MTV or logo or some channel that they watch, you know, or even on Netflix or Hulu, you know, or social media. Yeah, you know, they really, it's amazing to me, you know, out of the 60 students, I maybe had less than 5%, which is 3, right? You know, students like were up on their current events. And so it's, you know, the thing I hit hard on, especially in that class, is tying, you know, the past to the present and noting that, you know, yeah, this happened in the 19th century. Let's pull it up to the 21st century, see how, you know, what's changed, you know, on this particular issue, you know, and they're like, wow, that long? I'm like, well, it goes back even further. We can't even talk about misogynistic Aristotle, but that's another story.
Anybody have any other questions?
Just copying a question I heard this morning at another panel. Do any of you have any newbie mistakes in terms of if someone goes in with good intentions and messes it up trying to have difficult conversations in the classroom?
I don't know. You know, we can all feel we messed up, you know. But I think of newbie, Jeff and maybe even Ed referred to what I had as a newbie mistake. And it's interesting to me that we're all talking about the same thing, because I had in my personal notes that lower resources do not equate to personal deficits. That's what we're trying to get across. And so when you're killing them with the science or the facts man, you know, that's the beginning. And you think my first time around with a course that's specifically related to what we call the socioeconomic determinants of health. So it has nothing to do with bodies, it has nothing to do with physical. It's about culture, sociology, policy, all of that. Well, when they learn all these things, they'll see that all these folks around them are not full of deficits. They'll be able to see some strengths. And in the first class, and I don't see people face-to-face, first of all. I do my doctoral students face-to-face, but everything I do is online, has been here for the 12 years I've been here. And we have really deep interaction and conversations, and we become a community. So they feel free to tell me the truth. So the newbie mistake is when they hold fast to their truth, don't take it personally. You have not failed as a teacher. Do not take it personally. And begin to think about how you can do the same thing next time if it really was effective overall, or approach it from a different perspective. Even more importantly, put yourself in their shoes. I had someone, basically, she came out of Charlottesville, and she gave me the old pull up your bootstraps story. Because remember, we're talking about income inequality and educational opportunity and those sorts of things as it relates to people's well-being and health. And at the end, when I say, well, tell me, you know, how you feel and whatever, and it's, you know, all my folks didn't go to college, you know, and look where I am. So don't take it personally. Just sit back and critically analyze it and think about it and move from there.
When I started teaching my diversity class, God, I was so excited about it, and this is 10 years into my teaching experience. So I think my rookie mistake, and it happens with, you know, the first time you ever teach a class, you know, you have to feel it out, and my rookie mistake was thinking the students would be as excited about it as I was, you know, and I'm like, damn it, it's diversity, get on board, you know, and, you know, they really, it took them a while. So what I learned from that is that they don't have the context yet for getting excited about it. So I changed the beginning of my class to include more actually activities where they have to get out of their chairs and actually interact with these, you know, with each other, and go through some exercises to be, and then note. One thing that I started using was, you know, this is a safe space, and you really can speak your mind. And if you don't agree with something that I put out, please say it. Like, that's, you know, it's fair game. And I do a lot of low stakes writing assignments where I'm just like, what's something I said today in class that you agree with or don't agree with? and then just put it out there every now and then I don't call any of the students out, but it's a good way to sort of broach discussions later. But yeah, sometimes the energy level's not there, but then it made me get the energy level there. So that was a good rookie mistake for me.
Yeah, just briefly, we all need to remember, and I'm kind of a hippie this way, but we're all human beings, and we're all trying to do the best we can. And I often tell students in my class, I say, you know what, if something happens where a student offends you, or somehow I offended you, then send me an email, and then we can talk. All right, I'll tell you. So I was talking about race, class, and gender and all this other stuff. And then in my theory class, I let them compare and contrast two theorists, and they have to explain some social phenomenon. And so one of my students wanted to write her paper about the furries. Does anybody know what the furries are? They're adults who dress up in costumes like foxes and rabbits, and sometimes they become amorous. Anyways, so I'm going through my lecture. It's opening day, and I was like, and one student even wrote about furries. I'm like, y'all know this? Blah, 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 blah. And I'm just up there losing it because I thought it was a great read. Trust me, I was losing it reading this paper. I'm like, oh, this is awesome. Totally presentation of self. But anyways, an hour later, I got an email. You really offended me. I have friends who are furries, and I think it was completely disrespectful that you did this. So then Jennifer Kidd, who's not here right now, she sent me an email. And you know the Care Bears when you were growing up as a kid? She had taken a picture of all of us and put them in the different Care Bears. And I was Tenderheart Bear. But my point is that you can do the best that you can. And trust me, furries is now added to my list of things, right? That I will not disrespect them or be insensitive to people who are furries. And if any of you are here, you don't have to let me know. But I apologize in advance as well, too. But I mean, it's just one of those things. So I think emails behind closed doors, then you can talk to the student, hey, this is what I was really trying to get at. I'm sorry if it came off this way. And then what you'll find is that you calling them in and actually talking to them, they'll say, well, she did really care. And that's how we start to promote that change that I was talking about earlier. Yeah.
Okay, do we have any other questions before we move on to our... Oh, we do, Stephanie. She gets the orange.
Get to talk in the box one last time. Okay, so how do you welcome difficult dialogue, have a robust conversation, and also incorporate the tension that comes along with that? I know you've mentioned politics, religion is something that we just don't talk about in higher ed, or some of the other social identity markers on the spectrum of diversity. But part of that does include a dialectical tension. Maybe will students emote? And how do we, in the classroom, how do we incorporate that? And maybe not sometimes try to balance that out. You know what I mean?
I think it really comes down to when you start those difficult dialogues, you do set ground rules. I set ground rules and, talk to them about essentialism. Just because this young person here happens to be a woman who's African American does not mean when she's speaking she represents everyone else. Because what I've often found in giving talks or hosting panels for students is, well, if we're going to talk about what it's like to be black, well, why is this person up there who happens to be an African-American woman saying she knows what it's like to be me, who's the same demographics, right? And so when you start to diffuse that there's just, to me, there's just as much within group differences as there are between group differences. And when we start to acknowledge that, when people start to speak about these sensitive topics, well, I don't agree with you about that, I think it's this, it doesn't become a matter of either or, right or wrong. It become a matter of different components to the same idea, right? And so we can complement each other. You see it this way, I see it this way. It doesn't mean either one of us is right or wrong, but we can see them in a way that they complement each other, right? Where this may matter for you, but it may matter for me, and I respect your decision. And I think it takes time. I think it takes time. It's not something that I wouldn't advise people who just tomorrow to go out and just say, let's talk about race, because, or whatever the case may be. But if you find yourself in that situation, slow is better. Time is better. To think about things, even as yourself as an educator, to think about really what the students are saying. Make notes to yourself. And then what I've done when I first started teaching at Virginia Tech, and I had 65 students in a minority group relations course, they're like, you're studying race? You teach the class. I was like, oh, God. What I would do in uncomfortable situations, I'd say, you know what? Let's stop right now. let me get some time to think about this, and I'd come back the next day. Sometimes people would perceive that as a moment of weakness. What I saw was a moment of strength, that I didn't know enough about what was going on at that moment to deal with the 20 people that looked like it was about ready to be World War III in there, that I came back, and what we found was tensions were diffused, and then we started to analyze it in a more critical way, as opposed to just emotions, because emotions will supersede anything else you're trying to do rationally. But I think I got most of it, so that's what I do.
And I'm online. And that doesn't mean those tensions don't exist, and that challenge doesn't exist. You see it. I do silly stuff. I talked about role modeling, but I role model decorum and how we operate and talk about these kind of things. And I role model them in characters. So I might come online if they're in that debate that's tough for them, or the thing about, and I'll say, hey, I met your cousin so-and-so, so-and-so, and, down in, we at the Piggly Wiggly, so I'm the lady from the neighborhood, or I'm a nurse from somewhere, or I'm a political official, or maybe I'm Trump, and I say what maybe some folks are wanting to say in the way, but I'm in another character. So, because they're afraid sometimes to come into the forum and to begin this discussion. And then I always commend and applaud the people who jump into the fray, no matter how they come in, even if it's not effective. And then when they jump into the fray, I'll say, if I'm being me, thanks for jumping into the fray, blah, blah, blah. But a lot of times I'll be somebody else, and I'll come in and I'll pull out what they need to be doing out of them by being this other crazy character. I mean, I'm a off-the-cuff singer, actress, that kind of stuff, so it gets me to live another life. But it's role modeling, but in being a character.
I do a lot by deconstructing, and so I like writing, and I like my students to write. And so one of the exercises I do when I'm trying to remember, there's a video that I show of a school teacher who has, I think we've all seen this video, right? A school teacher who has a group of third graders, I think it was, and they have to wear a collar. Blue eyes, brown eyes. Have you seen that? Yeah. So I use that video as a good start to sort of get the dialogue going. And then what I do is I tell them, I'm like, I want to, so I give them a 5x7 card, and then I said on the line version of the card, I want you to go ahead and write what struck you about the video that you just watched. Like what really struck you about it. And then I tell them, after they've written it, I want them to underline the main thing about what they wrote for the last 5 minutes, and then I have them not share it with the class. Okay, I have them actually send it to me, and then I collect them, and then I go through them, and then the next day, the next time we met, then I go through some of the responses, because I felt, especially if it gets really heated or the dialogue is very, I always come to cards sometimes with just, 3x5s or 5x7 cards. I'm like, write it down. We're passing it out. Because it's a good way to diffuse, get them to write about their feelings, and then the next day I can revisit, and I try and pick cards that are from different sides of the, positions and stances. And then bring back the issue of the fact that there are multiple perspectives to an issue. There is no right or wrong, as he mentioned earlier, but it's a matter of your own sort of prejudices and predispositions, that you have towards a particular topic. So that's worked really, plus it gets them to write. Anything I can do to get them to write works for me. That's right, QEP.
I think I saw another hand before. Here.
Okay, quick question for you. Now, as you'd mentioned, I like a lot of the ideas because I teach economics, so it can get a little, from time to time. So now, do you have any, I guess, pointers if things really get out of hand? You know, I know how you incorporate a lot of the different techniques that you use to you kind of avoid it from getting out of control. But let's just say that it just gets out of control anyway. You know, what would each of you do in your respective science? What would you do to, like, turn the heat down and then bring it back to norm and then kind of integrate that back into the lesson that you were trying to teach?
Who wants to start? Oh, I'm going to Ed.
Sure. I think you always have to remember first and foremost that you control the classroom. Yeah, I am not, I never have, nor will I ever let students run my classroom. That's the first thing I would say to you. And when it does get to that point, I know it sounds crazy, but it goes way back to kindergarten to start turning off the lights and turning them back on. And they're still like, you know, they're like, oh yeah, we kind of are acting like kids right now. Yes, you are. Grow up. And you know, it's letting them know that, look, it's getting out of hand, and you bring it back. So it's your responsibility as a person who's facilitating the discussion, as well as managing the classroom, to basically say, clearly this is a topic that is not only worthy of discussion, but really has hit on a lot of, a lot of emotions, right? And so when it gets too emotional, and I think I go back to the whole issue of context and setting it up at the beginning of the class. You know, I saw that maybe the first time I taught the class. The second time I taught it, I didn't see the outbursts of like so much, you know, either rage or it's mostly rage, about a topic, and you know, I had to sit back and say, well, why is the rage there? You know, and it shouldn't be ignored. It should be, addressed and talked about. But I think that sometimes if you address it and talk about it right there and then, they're not willing to hear it. You know, so I usually, sort of nip it as much as I can. And then in the next class, I'm like, before we talk about today's, topic, I really want to revisit something we talked about last time. And hopefully you've had enough time to reflect on it. And, so here's my assessment based on what I saw going on in the classroom, and just give them like your quote unquote objective perspective, because, it's not truly objective, but, on what I saw happening, and then remind them that, this is a safe space and we are valuing, even if it's a position that's starkly, opposed to your own, you still need to, if you can't hear that person out, then you're just talking past each other, and so I think it's diffuse it, but then revisit it. That's what I do.
Yeah, I just always wait to the next class. Sometimes I just say, hey, today we've talked about enough, and usually the people that are really in the conflict, I'm like, hey, let's talk for a few minutes, because usually, right, it doesn't always happen with 2 minutes left in class. You have some time to talk to them. And then you say, I want you to just think about what happened today. Let's come back. We're going to talk about this on Wednesday, so I really want you to think about this. But as Ed was saying, I really lay this out at the beginning, right? Like, again, don't assume because you sit next to somebody that you think the same way. Those have always been my biggest problems. The biggest conflict I ever had in a class was we were reading an article on economic inequality, specifically Sharon Hayes' work on welfare reform. And what happened was two white males were sitting next to each other. And the one guy turned to the other guy when they were talking in small groups and said, yeah, all these people in America just want to live off welfare. And the other guy turned to him and said, my mom lived on welfare, and I'm a product of that. And it literally was, like you said, oh my God, what's going to happen? And they started yelling at each other in class. And I was like, so I said, what's happening? And then they said what happened. I said, all right, well, let's just all take a moment here. And what I wanted to do is I want to think about this. We'll talk to these two people. I want everyone to think about what just happened here. And we're all going to come back, and we're going to – and sometimes you have to sacrifice time. You know how valuable time is? We have to cover that article. Well, to me, what was more important, moving on to whatever the topic was for the next day, or to take time to really – and I brought in statistics about welfare and who's using it and time and et cetera, to really kind of break down this idea. Because I think so many times in that moment – everyone we want freedom of speech, but we're all talking at the same time. And it was just World War III, and then people were upset, right? And then what ended up happening is it really became a teachable moment. I lost a whole class of material, but who cares, right? It was more about getting them to see each other, to really see each other. And then the students, I remember one young woman started crying because these two young men, the one guy had seen how he really had offended somebody else. And then when the whole class started breaking it down, I think it was a really great moment where that class really came together. You know, sometimes we know that conflict can lead to cohesion. That moment where you think that things are about ready to fall apart can be a moment where it can lead to a better classroom, maybe even a more inclusive classroom. That would be my thing. Just wait. Just take a moment, talk to them, revisit it. Yeah.
What you said, all three, so I'll just say that it's our job to create the environment for learning. So, and even in an online environment, you can see, people think but if you set it up correctly, you can see what people are feeling. You can hear what people are saying. And, but it's our job to create, you said, I control my classroom. And I see that, yes, it's my job to create the environment for learning. So in doing so, when people act and get emotional about things, and they do, because these are emotions, especially sometimes when I'm making the transition towards letting go of my truth, things start to happen. Things come up in me. It's really interesting. And what I then do is we don't have to take a time out because we're in a asynchronous environment. But then that's my opportunity to contact those students on the side, which I do quite often. It can be in a text form, and using counseling skills that people who do this kind of work, even if we're not counselors, somehow we've learned it. You use these counseling skills. You affirm where they are and how they feel and what their perspective might be, and then you move into dismantling some maybe misconceptions. And often I have to do it on the phone. I'll do it online, and I'll say, call me, or what's your phone number? Where can I find you? And always trying to find common ground with them wherever they are in our Commonwealth and in other places, and create that environment. And so I don't worry about, gave up on this concept very early in my teaching career. I was a charismatic demonstrator. Expert, walk around the classroom, I know everything about my topic, which wasn't that broad, right, or my area, but that's not teaching, and that's not facilitating learning. So in not doing that, I don't cover things. I have a disclaimer on my class schedule. I'm a very anal type of person, so I have a class schedule that students might think it's moment to moment, but it's week by week, and there's subsets in the week. What the topic is, what the concepts are, what the learning activities are. This is all in the same grid, and it goes on for pages. And so the disclaimer up top is that according to how class goes or what your learning needs are, I may change this. And so when there's something that happens, I do change it because I don't cover things. I'm about generating and facilitating learning, so I have to reconfigure and help to create more of a conducive learning environment at that moment to let us move on and learn together.
So we actually only have 7 minutes left. I actually had, I was figuring that this was going to be the last session for the Summer Institute, so I actually had a handout, an activity to ask you to think about all of that you've learned over this workshop, and think about 2 activities or 2 things that you would do to be inclusive in the classroom. So we actually won't have time to go through that exercise. I wanted you to kind of think through those and then talk to someone that you hadn't met before that was different from you and kind of share some ideas, but it's still a good time to always think about reflecting on what did we learn from the workshop and all of these different events and the 3 awesome experts that we had here today. So I thank you so much for participating in this workshop. If you are a graduate student and you would like credit for attending this Preparing Future Faculty workshop, please make sure that you also complete the Preparing Future Faculty reflection worksheet to make sure that you receive credit. And if you are here for other Summer Institute events and you need signatures, you can either find Joyce Armstrong and she can sign your PFF certificate application form. Thank you so much, everybody, and I hope you enjoyed the Summer Institute.